Over the past year and a half, I've sat in my driver's seat, walked towards, by, or away from the camera, looked at my feet on the ground, made coffee, made mistakes, marveled at nature, injured myself, my eye healing out, watched sunsets and sunrises, hiked, paddled, biked, spelunked, skied, snorkeled, and swam to explore the great outdoors inside 48 different but similar regions known as the contiguous United States of America. Oh yeah, and I also drank some beer along the way. This is the story of how that adventure came to be. The best parts, the worst parts, and the knowledge I'll take moving forward. I've always liked to explore, or needed to really. Since I graduated college, I haven't been in one place for more than 6 months. There's just too much world out there for me to not see as much as I can. Well, that is until the height of the pandemic in 2020. I returned from backpacking Europe to move in with my parents, and a few months later, I lost the job I had lined up for the summer. Things were not going to plan. But you can always make a new plan. I had been interested in the idea of living in a converted van for a few years, and whether I wanted it or not, I had plenty of time to research. Who knew when international travel would open up again? And if you own a van, you're not in and out of hotels or taking public transportation. I wanted to have a mission, though, to make it more of a trip, not just living life. What if I did a hike in every state? Or better yet, just an outdoor adventure in general? And I had a new baby YouTube channel called Beer in Beautiful Places, so why not do a beer in each state too? Beer is sometimes made with locally grown hops or water from a nearby river, and some regions have a style they're known for, like the New England IPA. It's a perfect treat that everywhere would have, but it's a little different in each place. To make it an even 3 requirements for each state, I started out doing an active service along with my adventure in beer. That wasn't feasible in the long run, so I let that part of the goal become a little more free-form when it was still pretty early on. But there I had it. Road Trip Brew SA. I bought my Toyota Sienna in January 2021 and did most of the building part of the conversion in March and April. I still had a normal job at that time, but I spent a weekend taking it out on a test run in April. I counted it as my first adventure in beer in my home state, Kentucky. I went backpacking in Red River Gorge for 2 nights. This was my first time spending the night by myself in a tent in the woods, but you just gotta be prepared as possibly possible and keep yourself aware enough of your surroundings, but distracted enough to not overthink every single rustling leaf in the wind. Easier said than done. I spent the next weeks working as many hours as I could and finishing up my van, gathering supplies, giving it a few touches of home, and packing what I guessed I would need for the next year and a half, spent mostly outside. Towards the end of May, it was time. Ah, love you all. You're the best. Am I on Jim's grass? Bye. Bye. You'll see me soon. And so the adventure begins. I drove the same interstate between Louisville and Indianapolis I'd driven before, but this time was different. This time I was van lifing. I hiked Shays and Turkey Run state parks, found a public park to charge my too small Jackery to attempt to run my too big fridge and freezer, and slept in a Walmart parking lot. Look at this place. The second night, though, I found a natural area by a boat ramp. It was sweltering hot, but I was too afraid of someone seeing me, a solo female, to leave my van. But I did open my trunk to a view of the river floating past and enjoyed a Dragonfly IPA. This was the moment I had picked up extra shifts for, spent most of my bank account for, spent hours researching, planning, and working for. I was finally in my finished van, in nature, casually enjoying the evening. I planned on hiking Starved Rock State Park in Illinois, but there weren't many free options in that area, so I stayed at a paid campground for the first time. After seeing all the waterfalls and cool rocks, I still had a lot of energy, so I went on a trail run at the nearby Matheson State Park. After a shower, it was about time to start making dinner, but I opted to have a beer in my hammock first. This was one of my first moments of reveling in the freedom that solo travel grants a person. You don't usually go for a run after a hike or spend time relaxing, when that means making dinner in the dark, when you're with another person. To back up for a second, a few years before this, I completed the Tahoe Rim Trail in Nevada and California. I wanted to do another weeks-long hike, but the group dynamics between me and my hiking buddy I went with weren't great, so I had the idea to go alone. I found a list on the internet of best hikes for solo hikers, and the only one more than 100 miles, but less than a few thousand, was the Superior Hiking Trail, stretching for 300 miles along Lake Superior from just south of Duluth to the Canadian border. I wanted to do it, but I also wanted to live in a van and travel the country, so I just kind of squashed the two trips into one. An adventure within an adventure. So, back to the story, it was already time to leave my homey, custom-built, brand-new van and hang out in the woods for 3 weeks. It was really hard. There was a heat wave my first few days. I got an injury that made it hard to walk. The bugs were horrendous, even though I was applying permethrin constantly. One time I started walking through what looked like normal trail, but turned out to be ankle-deep, then shin-deep, then knee-deep mud. Being solo in the wilderness wasn't that hard once I got used to it. I enjoyed the choice to take it easy or push myself, try to reframe negative situations or admit they sucked, accept the suckiness in order to move on. The last day I spent most of it hiking in the rain, being trailed by a swarm of mosquitoes. That night, I somehow got my tent set up in the rain, and only about 10 mosquitoes got in the tent, which wasn't bad considering the hundreds I kept out. The day I finished felt like the longest day on trail. It was like, even though in my rational brain I knew I would be hiking until late afternoon, early evening, but in my subconscious I thought, this is supposed to be over today, why is it not over now? I've learned self-discipline and self-compassion and when to use them. Finally, the miles got fewer and fewer. Every condition for the ending of the trail came together perfectly. After a difficult time on trail and a difficult last day, I had the northern terminus all to myself to look out over the view into Canada on a clear day. I was ready to take on the rest of Road Trip Brew SA. If I can do this, I can do anything. But that wouldn't happen for another few months. In 2021, international travel was restricted, and summer camps that relied on workers from other countries were severely understaffed. I worked in the camp industry for 9 years and just decided that winter that would no longer be my career path. But I was offered pretty good pay, and I like to be helpful where I can, so I ended up driving all the way to California to work for the rest of the summer. While I was out there, I got a friend to help me film a van tour, and that video took off, leading more viewers to be interested in my channel as a whole. I appreciated everyone that watched before, but now having even more of an audience watching was a bit more reassuring that I was doing something right. So we get to the end of the summer, finally. Staff trip to Vegas. I hate it. Gotta wait it out. Before I go back east, I arranged to have professionals install a solar panel in my van, but it takes a few weeks for a panel to arrive, so I gotta wait that out. Finally, get it installed, and while I'm driving across the country, some lights come on my dashboard. As I'm heading out of St. Paul, I pull into an AutoZone for them to do their diagnostic tool and tell me what's wrong. They don't know what's wrong. Something is wrong, but they can't say what it is. I go to the nearest mechanic. Rookie mistake, but remember, I never owned a car before. They can fix it. The end of the day, the car is returned to me and the lights come on again, so I take it back. They can fix it. The next day, the van is returned to me, same lights come on again. I take it back. It takes a full week for me to realize this isn't random misfortune, it's a pattern. I take the van to a Toyota dealership. It's going to be expensive, but I need someone that really knows what they're working with, not just someone that seems very hardworking and well-meaning. After a few days, I was told sediment got into my engine, maybe through a dirty oil change, and it spread throughout the whole vehicle. So eventually, that's going to cause it to stop working. Completely. You won't be able to drive this van you've already invested thousands into, miss. That'll be $3,000, please, for us to tell you this. I worked all summer so I could enjoy time on the road living off my savings. And with this payment, it was almost all gone. I also lost so much time. There goes spending a leisurely summer and early fall, making my way into New England and leaving when it got cold. Was I even meant to be on this road trip? With all the things that came up since I finished the SHT, was the universe trying to tell me something? I could think of so many other lives for myself easier than this. I missed my family. I missed California. But I didn't construct a small room inside of a minivan for nothing. So I went on. Picking up right where I left off, I went kayaking and camping in the North Woods of Wisconsin. I felt so happy and, in a way, relieved to be doing what I set out to do again. I definitely made the right choice, even though who knows how long it'll last. I loved Michigan's Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore. Absolutely marveled at the color of the water and the uniqueness of rock formations, and the joy of traveling and exploring nature continued. Dipping south for a second, I did a few day hikes at Hocking Hills in Ohio. Another one with some interesting rocks. This is about the time I stopped trying to do an active service in every state. The logistics of coordinating a volunteer session with my constantly changing schedule was really complicated. Oh, it's horrible so far. It wasn't uncommon for an organization to say, "That's very generous, but don't worry about it." Because if they were going to take the time to train someone, they wanted that person to be available more than once. Organized volunteering wasn't practical for my lifestyle, but I still wanted to pitch in for places I was enjoying, so that became things like picking up trash, paying fees you could easily walk past on public lands, keeping extra granola bars or snacks in my console for people on the side of roads that could use a friendly gesture. Anyway, in Pennsylvania, I had so much fun on a natural water slide, until kind of a risky part at Ohiopyle State Park. I ended up sleeping in a lot of parking lots here, and I was trying to make money with Instacart, but it was a lot of work and the pay never really added up. I knew living in my van wouldn't be all frolicking in the forest, but this was my first time I had the feeling of, this isn't that fun. But then passed quickly with the excitement of a New England fall. Because I had to hurry before the cold really set in for the winter, I had to drive through New York pretty quickly. But what a drive it was! My first memorably beautiful campsite of the trip was tucked deep in some woods with a little creek running through and yellow leaves falling all around. I felt so much joy just to be there. On the downside, I suspected I might have gotten bed bugs somewhere because of some itchy bumps around my stomach and back, and on my arms and neck. The bumps turned into patches by the time I got to Vermont, and I just couldn't take it anymore, so I finally went to the doctor. It wasn't bed bugs, it was poison ivy, or more broadly, contact dermatitis. Still, I don't know where I got that, but at least I had my answer as to what it was. The biggest bummer was that urgent care visit took up most of what was left of my savings, but it was in the cutest small town, and I wouldn't have gone otherwise. New Hampshire was also charming, and I rented a kayak to explore Lake Umbagog. The map I was following may not have been drawn to scale, though, and I ended up paddling back in the dark. Driving into Maine, I was delighted by fog rolling through multicolored mountains. I was driving through on a Saturday and happened upon a Halloween fair. I only stayed for a few minutes, but between cornhole and friendly people, the cute, homey, brick building and old-fashioned streetlight vibes I felt in small-town Maine were almost identical to the vibes of small-town Kentucky. People say the regions of the U.S. are pretty different, but I think they're pretty similar, too. My main destination, get it, pun, was my first national park of the trip, the stunning Acadia. I hiked up Cadillac Mountain to see the sunrise, but my peaceful, moving moment did not go as planned because of the crowd of tourists that drove up the mountain. But the day turned around because of the awesome challenge of the Precipice Trail. It was October, so I stopped by to see the Halloween festivities in Salem, Massachusetts, and then rented a small sailboat on Cape Cod to explore the open waters. But when the day came, the company said it was too cold and they couldn't send anyone out in those conditions. I was lucky to have some pleasantly warm days in October, but the cold was setting in. So, instead I hung out with harbor seals, ate clam chowder, and went on a hike where I got to see several types of environments present on the Cape. The New England goodness continued as I came into Rhode Island. I walked around Beavertail State Park, did the Cliffs Walk, and stayed in one of my favorite free camp spots on the whole trip, a gravel parking lot on the coast where I could see from my bed 2 seals just chilling in a cove. In Connecticut, I was scared of flooding and intense wind because of a nor'easter, but it was totally fine. I hiked Sleeping Giant State Park and cherished the fall colors. I had only passed through New Jersey before, and I wasn't sure how much was city and how much was left natural. But it was a wonderful surprise. There was plenty of beautiful wooded areas. I did a hike at Palisades Interstate Park with a waterfall, cool rock formations, a long rock scrambling section, and even a swing with a view. I caught a ferry into Delaware and spent a day riding a bike around Cape Henlopen State Park. I never realized how the sandy coastal environment could be so nestled into a forest. I even saw mushrooms growing in the sand. On the west part of Maryland, just above D.C., I did another really fun rock scrambling trail called Billy Goat Trail. And it did deserve that name. The days were getting shorter, and the cold made me much less enthusiastic to leave my van. But in Virginia, I did what may be one of my favorite trails ever, Old Rag, in Shenandoah National Park. Not only were the views breathtaking, but it was basically a natural obstacle course, where you had to climb up, climb down, walk through, step across. So fun. Eating pizza in my trunk afterwards will always be a big memory from the trip, too.
Best pizza of my life. I'll say it.
My last stop on this first leg of Road Trip USA was West Virginia. There's so much to do there, but I chose to spend a day wandering around New River Gorge and admiring the river and its powerful rapids. It was getting frosty, though, so I was more than happy to head back to Kentucky for Thanksgiving and spend some nights sleeping inside. I had planned to do a lap around the South in December because I thought it would be warmer than in Kentucky, but then I got to thinking, it's still probably going to be pretty cold. And it was. But there's things you can see when it's cold that you can't other times, so I took advantage of that and hiked Old Mac at Frozen Head State Park in Tennessee, where I saw icicles and frozen mud. I even saw an owl as I was leaving. I crossed the state line into North Carolina, hoping it would be warmer, but it wasn't. But I did enjoy the craft beer scene in Nashville, treated myself to a night in a cozy, warm hostel, and chose a trail that sounded easy and scenic. But it ended up being the tallest point in the state, and I got to hang out inside of a cloud at the top. After sleeping in a parking lot in South Carolina the next night, I woke up to a feeling that I hadn't felt in a while. I wasn't cold in my van. I didn't have to wear a coat. In fact, I could even wear shorts and a t-shirt. I stayed in Charleston for about a week, just enjoying the warmth. I visited Angel Oak, a 400-year-old live oak tree that looked like a giant spider, or the Mind Flayer from Stranger Things, and the Charleston Tea Farm, because they had what looked like a tunnel of live oaks. And I also got to learn how tea is made. My favorite moment in South Carolina, and one of the best moments from the whole trip, happened because I stayed in a parking lot of a bar/restaurant where I got to have a beer on a deck over the ocean at sunset. That night, I woke up early in the morning and couldn't get back to sleep, so I thought, why not watch the sunrise since I'm here? There was barely anyone around, and I watched with the sound of waves as background music while the sky changed from pink to golden to its usual blue, and then happened to look in the other direction to see a rainbow. It was a peaceful, powerful, awe-inspiring moment I had been hoping for on Cadillac Mountain. Sometimes amazing moments in nature happen because you went on big adventures to find them, but sometimes you get lucky enough to just happen upon those moments too. In Georgia, I hoped to find something similar, but Tybee Island was too expensive for me. I thought Savannah was gorgeous, but couldn't find any hikes nearby that really stood out to me, and it was getting closer and closer to Christmas. So I said to Georgia, I'll be right back, and went back to Kentucky to spend the holiday with my family. In the new year, I returned to Georgia and got to experience Providence Canyon State Park. It's the only place I know of with red and orange rock east of Colorado, and it was also super cool because there was a little bit of lavender in the rock, too. Florida was an obvious choice for January, so I spent a while there. I switched to DoorDash as my main source of making money. If you're strategic about what orders to pick up or decline, you can earn a pretty fair wage. Spending full days driving around a city that was brand new to me was hard work, but it also enriched my experience as a whole. I saw how the people of different places acted, spoke, and looked. I had laughable, unfair, and infuriating moments. I delivered to actual mansions and to places where I thought, while the delivery fee was pretty expensive, they were probably ordering because they couldn't afford a car. My favorite part was making runs for food banks or delivering folks who told me that they weren't physically able to get out themselves. It was nice not to just make money, but to actually serve the world. I do have some things I don't like about DoorDash as a whole, but providing a service in like 12 different cities and towns in our country was eye-opening. But back to Florida, my two biggest adventures were snorkeling in the Florida Keys. It was so cool. I saw so many fish and so much coral. If you haven't been snorkeling before, you really ought to try it. Enough to get pretty good, and then there's a whole new world to explore. Oh, and I got to go on a ranger-led wet walk in a cypress grove and kayak through a canal in Everglades National Park. That trip will always bring back a little bit of a sad memory because the cypress grove was one of the coolest, most unearthly places I'd been, and I was so excited about the video I took there, but then I lost that camera in the canal while kayaking. Alligators, crocodiles, and sharks lived in that water, so going in after it was not an option. That footage and my way of filming water-based and highly active adventures and my first piece of video equipment I invested in was lost. I wasn't so sure about posting a video of myself shedding actual tears over losing a material possession in a way that I could have avoided. But if I'm going to share my real-life experiences, I can't only share the ones where I look smart and capable and happy. I want you in on the full story. So I posted it. But something amazing happened. No one said anything mean. Everyone was very sympathetic and comforting. People even gave me money to save up for a new camera. Someone even gave me a camera itself, and I put the leftover money towards buying a laptop so I can do things online more efficiently. I was blown away by the amount of support and encouragement I received. People can be really, really kind sometimes, and I'm extremely lucky that a lot of kind people have found their way to watching my videos and liked them enough to keep traveling with me. So we went on. In February, I braved my way out of Florida and into the rest of the warming country. I spent a day in Alabama exploring the Mobile-Tinsall River Delta. I had never been to a delta before. It's like a lot of rivers, but all in one place. I got to watch a really pretty sunset over the water there, too. In Mississippi, I was feeling a bit low energy, but I got to walk by a bayou, another landform I hadn't been to before. It looked a lot like a river, but the water is shallow and brackish. I didn't know what brackish really meant back then, but it's basically fresh water and salt water combined. I had always wanted to go to Mardi Gras, and I timed out my trip so I was in New Orleans just in time. I got to spend the whole day at parades. The ones I went to were more rated PG than what I pictured, but there was some stuff, the technical term is throws, that weren't caught and probably ended up in a garbage dump somewhere. They do reuse some throws year to year, but you have to wonder what happens to the rest of it. But anyway, once I got the chance to get out into nature, I took a swamp tour and got to see all the sights you'd expect. Cypress knees and gators and raccoons eating marshmallows. Continuing east, I came to Texas. I drove across in chunks and loved watching the coastal part next to Louisiana turn into mesquite trees and prickly pears. Then the hill country turned to plateau country, which turned into wide open space, and then I was at Guadalupe Mountains National Park. I did my first backpacking trip of the new year, but took a wrong turn on trail and didn't get to my campsite till after dark, and absolutely froze at night. But hiking down the mountains the next morning, I was absolutely delighted by the rock formations. So cool. Next, New Mexico. There were two places I really wanted to see, so I walked barefoot on the dunes at White Sands National Park and wandered silently through the hoodoos at Ashislepa Wilderness. Both places were otherworldly and unlike anything I'd ever seen before. I had been looking forward to Arizona for a while, but that backpacking trip was just as unlucky as the one in Texas. For as long as I've been making videos, I've had trouble running out of storage on my phone, which I use to film. I'm not very technologically minded compared to how I imagine other videographers are. On this trip, after rushing to get ready for the only trip in the Grand Canyon with a permit available, my phone would not take any more videos because it was too full, which is a typical thing to happen. I was sitting on a stone wall trying to fix it when someone started chatting with me about going backpacking. And I'm always having to tell people I'm not alone, but just meeting friends, and treating everyone as if they could possibly be out to get me, but in a way I'm still seeming pleasant and not suspicious of them. So while I'm trying to think of all that at once talking to this person, I deleted the app that I used to edit videos. And I had unsafe projects on there that I was still working on. Because of the nature of editing videos, you can't save them like you'd save working on a Word document or something. I was upset with myself. I was upset with technology for being so difficult. And once I got away from people and hiked further down into the canyon, I let myself cry. Over material possessions, again. I love making videos. I'm not trying to do anything too complicated. Why can't things just work out for me? I came to terms with what had happened that evening. By that night, the wind was constant, and my tent made so much noise rustling in the breeze I couldn't sleep. In the early morning, I was really not feeling well. But as long as I was awake, why not watch the sunrise? And it was magical. The sunlight streamed down into the canyon little by little. The light hit the rocks and plants in the most beautiful way. Everything was still, and everything was the way nature intended for it to be. And then I threw up. There was something going around in the water at that time I visited the Grand Canyon. Plus, I could have also been dehydrated, even though I was drinking more than I thought I needed. Which leads me to my next problem, getting water. I didn't realize how much further down into the canyon I'd have to hike to find a water source. It wasn't to a dangerous point, but I definitely didn't need to tack on more miles and elevation after already not feeling well. After getting the water, hiking back up to where my campsite was, taking a little nap, hiking back up to the parking lot, I was fine. Just kidding. My phone had stopped working altogether. For the next 2 days, I didn't have a usable phone. And while that might sound like I was worried about not scrolling Facebook endlessly or losing my Snap streak, that wasn't the problem. The problem was that I was all alone with no way to call for help if something happened, and no way to look up even what direction to head in to go find help. I know people survived without it for most of human history, but it's hard going from living with a convenience and a safety measure to without it in the blink of an eye. Using my road atlas and stopping several times to ask for help from anyone that would give me the time of day, I made it to Untappd, Utah. I had to pass up places I intended to stop, some of the most beautiful places in the country, like Antelope Canyon, because not only was I not as safe as I could be, but my family was worried about me too. In Untappd, there was a phone repair shop, and by some miracle, it took quicker and costed less than I expected, and everything was restored. I could finally tell my family I was okay. Use GPS to guide me, research what resources were available to me in different places, find campsites, get a sense of connection to other people online. Nothing makes you feel more lucky than losing something and getting it back again. Happily traveling with Google Maps and Spotify, I made my way up to Bryce Canyon, Utah. Not only were the rock formations incredible, this was also an important milestone to me personally because the video I made there was my first sponsored video. It wasn't like I was instantly rich or anything, but it was an indication that I could slowly make this into how I make my living. Heading to the east, I got to spend a day skiing, thanks to a connection I had getting me a lift ticket and a resort employee that pulled me out after my van went sliding into a snowbank. It was April, so it was still cold enough for snow in Colorado. It was cold at night, but I had so many cold nights at that point, at least I got to enjoy the novelty and the insulating power of snow. I watched the huge, majestic mountains turn into the huge, majestic plains as I made my way into Kansas. I've heard driving in one straight line really gets to people, but I love that drive because of the spectacle of the Great Plains. It gave me that same feeling as being out in the ocean. It's kind of scary how vast it is, just going on forever. Makes you feel small, in a way that everyone needs in their life. Next, I went down to Oklahoma, where I spent a day at Natural Falls State Park. I had been in the dry and barren West for a few months, and then I jumped back to where there's more deciduous trees in the middle of spring. I didn't have to wait patiently for the buds to grow. They were there already, and well on their way to becoming leaves. Further east in Arkansas, the mountain towns of the Ozarks reminded me of the mountain towns of eastern Kentucky. Not only beautiful, but beautiful in a way that feels familiar to me. I hiked up a creek in a gorge, one of my most heart-pounding excursions, on a trail called Eye of the Needle in Buffalo National River. When I made it to Missouri, I was planning to hike near a big cascading waterfall called Rocky Falls. But the next day, there was flooding on the road to get there, and the falls themselves were flooded too. The trail I wanted to go on was underwater. So instead, I hiked a much shorter hike to the top of a hill nearby, saw purple rock, and sat on the top of the falls, just spending some time taking it all in. Being in the presence of nature can be just as peaceful as moving through it. By that time, it was May, and 2 couples I knew were getting married, so I headed back to Louisville to be there for their big day. I even made it home for Derby. While I was in my hometown, my mental health took a nosedive. I can't even explain why, but it was just one of those times where you feel like you can't do anything right, can't get out of bed, can't stand yourself. Just generally really not doing good, you know? But I thought I might as well keep myself busy and kept pushing towards what I set out to do. So I went on. The next state was Iowa, and I got to go caving. It was a drizzly day at Makokata Caves, but I loved crawling around, feeling the rock, feeling the mud. But sometimes when you don't have a shower to go home to, you gotta take things into your own hands. My destination in Nebraska was at the western end of the state, but I stopped for the night at Nebraska National Forest and decided I would rather explore there than keep driving. I hiked to a fire tower and appreciated being in an environment that felt like the eastern U.S., the Great Plains, and the West, all in one. In South Dakota, of course I had to go to the Badlands. It was probably one of my more smooth backpacking trips. My eyes were itching so bad because of allergies, and I fell down a little divot in the trail due to... I was walking backwards because I'm an idiot. Thought it would be more smoother, and I fell down into a ditch. A completely normal reason that was out of my control that any normal person would do. But I covered more miles than I expected and set up camp in a small, grassy, but also rocky ravine that was unlike anywhere I'd ever camped before. North Dakota was really beautiful too, and Theodore Roosevelt National Park was pretty otherworldly with the color-banded rolling hills. I knew I wanted to do something longer than what I typically do as a day hike, so I set out for a 10-mile loop. I was worried about the heat, but it was really my allergies that got to me. It was so bad, my eyes were so teary I couldn't see the trail. I didn't want to turn around only 3 miles in, but it felt unnecessary and cruel to make myself go any further when I wasn't enjoying it. My allergies got better little by little the further I went west. Plus, the staggering mountains of Montana were enough to take my mind off it at the least. I spent a few days in Glacier National Park and went kayaking on Lake Flathead. The only region of the country I hadn't been to before Road Trip USA was the Pacific Northwest, so I was really excited to reach Washington. I'm sad to report the entire state did not look like the movie Twilight at all times, but it was definitely beautiful. I took a lap around the Olympic Peninsula, seeing the mossy and alien Hoh rainforest, the furthest northwest point in the U.S., and the Sole Duck area of Olympic National Park. To jump back in time for a second, when I bought this van, the dealership convinced me that because this van came with run-flat tires, there was no need to carry a spare. You would know when your tire was punctured, and then you could drive on it for 50 miles to go to a mechanic and get it changed out. But you remember when those lights came on my dashboard that summer, and I had to spend a long time figuring out why before I could resume the road trip and head to Wisconsin? Those lights never went off, so I didn't have a functioning tire pressure light. So, as I was heading south from the Port Angeles area, I started to hear a noise. Didn't know what it was, but it was a constant bum, bum, bum. Was it just the noise of running over the cracks on the road? Okay, you can probably see where I'm going with this. It was the tire that got punctured somehow. The noise wasn't loud or obvious at first, so I had been driving on it for who knows how long. It was a pretty rural area, but I found cell service and I headed towards Poulsbo to find a mechanic that'd be open the next day. I took note of how many miles I had driven since I knew it was the tire, and I think it was around 20 when the whole car started to vibrate. The noise was so loud and fast. But it was only a few more miles to town, and I had a total of 50 miles, so I could probably make it. The shaking was so bad the text on my GPS screen was hard to read. There was a car behind me, a little too close for comfort. Then the shaking was so bad I couldn't see the screen because it was all a blur. There was a huge bang. I pulled my car to the shoulder. As expected, the tire exploded and there was damage to the body of the car in the area surrounding it. I spent the next hour answering the same questions over and over again for different agencies to get a tow service, and the cheapest was $200. And I started to wait. I was on the shoulder of a state highway, just after a curve, so I wasn't exactly in a safe place, but I couldn't move either. At around 1 a.m., the company called to say because I was in an isolated area out on the Olympic Peninsula, and it was the middle of the night, would I mind if they resumed their search during business hours the next morning? Did I have anyone that could come pick me up? No, I said, I don't know anyone in this entire state. So I stayed on the side of the highway that night, listening to the incessant tick of my emergency flashers and the smack of air hitting my van as cars whooshed past every few minutes. Finally, the tow came in the late morning. It was Saturday, but luckily there was a Walmart with an auto shop that would be open. I told them what happened, and they told me they don't work on run-flat tires. That was the only mechanic that was open. Monday was the 4th of July, so it would be 3 days until I could get any help. I called my parents to give them an update of what was happening as I prepared to spend the next days hiding in plain sight in the parking lot, staying in my tiny, hot van with the doors closed not to attract attention. It was a small town and an area people vacation in, and all the hotels were out of my price range. But my parents said they'd pay for me as a gift. Finally, things were looking up. Or were they? As I was packing up before walking the few blocks to the hotel, I saw someone put a piece of paper on my windshield. It was an extremely passive-aggressive note. They had gotten back in their car about to drive away, but were lingering to see my reaction. I jogged over as urgently but unaggressively as possible and asked for a few more details. I didn't even know what she was talking about. Apparently, she was parked so far forward in her parking spot her front wheels were in the next one, and then I pulled into that spot. I guess I was distracted by the fact that my car could barely move at all, and I parked with my front bumper touching hers. I was in the wrong for not making sure the spot was clear before pulling in, so I apologized and explained all that happened to me in the past 12 hours. She never said sorry for the note or for parking incorrectly, but I was just happy she left me alone. I spent the next days trying to enjoy the treat of being in a hotel and not to think about how much this whole incident would cost. When Tuesday came and I went back to the van with another tow truck, there was a giant angry key mark across my hood. Wonder who that was from. It could have been worse, and I know that, but I also had to allow myself to process that I was shaken up, stressed, scared, and without a familiar face for comfort, and apparently headed for something I did by accident. In fact, until I wrote all these events out to tell you them now, I was still questioning whether I might just be being overdramatic. But I wasn't. It was bad. So I left Washington. Luckily, my younger brother was living in Portland, Oregon, so I had a place to take time off from the road. But my brother was sick, and being in proximity, I got sick too. Eventually, it was best if I got back to traveling instead of taking up space, my words not his, in an already small apartment. About 6 months before this, I tried to get a permit for the John Muir Trail, which would be an epic, long adventure in beautiful California, but I didn't win the permit lottery. Fast forward to one morning in Oregon, I tried again for the week in advance online permit, and I got it! I knew it would be a huge challenge, especially with a short time to finalize gear, plan travel and resupply logistics, and adjust to the elevation. But I had a permit.
Here we come.
I could really make a whole nother documentary about my time on the JMT, also called Numupoyo. The first day had a huge elevation gain, but then it wasn't as extreme. for about 3 days, and the elevation gains and losses were even harder. And it rained all the time. Once it rained from early afternoon to bedtime for 5 days straight.
I am so cold.
What was I even doing here? Yes, it was extremely scenic and a good challenge, and every day was epic, but I still questioned myself. Was I doing this because I wanted to, or because I wanted to be able to tell people I did? Luckily, towards the end of the trail, I got into a more consistent rhythm. Started recognizing my fellow hikers that went about the same pace as me, and I made friends. I planned the trip so that my birthday would be when I was on trail, but closer to the end so I would have my trail legs under me. I celebrated my 30th year on this planet on top of Forester Pass with new friends all around me. 30 is a milestone, and I know someday I'll look back and say, what was that young dummy thinking? But from the perspective I had that day, I've been noticing a difference in my ability to stay asleep. I notice my body being sore in ways that it hasn't been before. My vision is blurry when I first wake up sometimes. Even though I'm still very physically able and taking care to be that way for a while, it's a reminder that I won't always be. But I had a really good birthday, and the end of the trail wasn't that many miles away. I decided instead of trying to get done quickly as possible to make it 2 days so I could watch the sunrise from Mount Whitney, which was my finish line. Luckily, the people I was with were thinking the same thing, so we got to spend more time in camp together. I met a lot of people on trail with different backgrounds, but everyone had something powerful about them. Everyone had a reason for being there. One of my friends was hiking in memory of his son, Michael, who had hiked the same trail with him years before. At the beginning of the trail, I was questioning why I was there.
What am I getting myself into?
But then I realized why. Because life only lasts so long. I want to live as much as I can while I can. My 20s are over, and someday the whole thing will be over. I thru-hike because even though I'm cold and hungry and dirty and injured, I'm living. Living as much as I possibly can. And that was California. There's so many different environments in that state, but gas was like $6, so getting to and from the Sierras was all I wanted to drive. I needed to rest up, and the best way to do that was to stay in one area and get into a routine. Reno was great for that because on the weekends I'd work DoorDash, because that's usually when you make the most money, and during the week I'd work on YouTube stuff or even escape to Lake Tahoe, which became my favorite lake in the whole US. No offense to Lake Superior. But back to my YouTube work, when I was on my hiking trip, I was filming my regular videos, but also YouTube shorts. Honestly, I made them very simple because I couldn't take on editing one more thing. Making full-length videos where I can tell the whole story, show the view, show the details, and explain my thoughts, that's my real passion. But I went ahead and made shorts mostly because people say they get a lot of views. And get a lot of views they did. It was kind of not fun because with more people watching, not all of those people were kind. But on the flip side, because of my channel's growth, I've been able to not work DoorDash, but support myself through different ways, all having to do with YouTube. To be fair, I have a low-cost life, but it's still exciting to me. On one of my last days DoorDashing, a drop-off turned into a conversation, because I was procrastinating getting back to work. And this conversation was with someone that ran a company and actually needed an extra pair of hands for a little bit, if I was interested. It wasn't the type of work I would seek out, but the pay was good, so I planned to spend 2 weeks doing really whatever needed to be done at this dusty storage place where pigeons lived in the ceiling and stray cats battled over territory outside. But then after 2 years of thinking I must have a really good immune system or something, I got COVID. And 2 weeks turned into 4. At least I was barely feeling any symptoms and could work outside by myself, so I was earning money, but that was the rest of the summer. So on my last adventures, I'd be really cold at night, and I would have to hurry through those states to get somewhere warm, instead of leisurely meandering through. But finally, I tested negative for COVID and could resume traveling. I went up to Idaho, where I was worried that I might not be driving as safely as usual because I couldn't stop goggling at the Sawtooth Mountains. I did an overnight backpacking trip, and even though I got a late start and ran out of fuel for my stove, it went pretty smoothly compared to some of my other trips. On my way across Idaho, I was pulling into a campsite for the night and misjudged the depth of tire ruts covered by a mud puddle. I got so stuck, not even my all-wheel drive or putting something solid under my tires could save me. Looking back, I think the bottom of my car was sitting on the ground between the tire ruts, so there really wasn't anything I could do. It was an expensive wrench out, but still, I had cell service and money in my bank account. It could have been a lot worse. Seemed like it would never happen, but I finally crossed my last state line into Wyoming! 48th state! We did it! You and me, people! Oh my goodness! It didn't snow while I was there, but my van had frost on it in the morning. It was so cold. I spent one day going on hikes in the Grand Tetons and one day sightseeing in Yellowstone. My parents actually met because they worked in Yellowstone, so it was very full circle to end the trip in a place that was spoken of like a legend throughout my life growing up. I had mixed feelings about the trip ending. Bummed to come to an end of a really cool mission I gave myself. Relieved to not have an incentive to be anywhere specific. I could just find somewhere warm and stay. But most of all, I was flooded with gratitude. My van not only held out for the whole trip, but lasted through an exploding tire and a night spent in the mud. I struggled with mental health and physical health, but always came out on the other side. Finances weren't easy, but I found ways to make it work. Technology, whether it was storing videos on my phone or keeping the electricity on in my van, was against me, but I dealt with everything that came up. I put in a lot of work to make this trip a reality, but luck was on my side too. From van life stuff I saw online, it seemed like it would be easy to meet people doing the same thing, but the only time that really happened for me was at a Cracker Barrel parking lot in Florida because we were all cramped together. Other than that, people tended to space themselves out more, and it was more of a lone wolf situation than what I perceived it to be. Because of the bigger amount of time spent alone, I had less in-person human interaction, and stuff got to me more than it usually would. If a cashier said something snarky to me, or the car behind me honked if I didn't immediately blast off in the 0.5 seconds after the light turned green, I couldn't shake it off like I normally would. The meanness stuck to me. Another reason for the heightened sense of emotions could have been because I was traveling and experiencing something new almost every day, so I had more memorable events happening in my life total. And because of that, I had more really, really good things happening and really, really bad things happening. In New England alone, for example, one minute I was loving life, nature is beautiful and mine for the exploring. The leaves are falling like confetti, this is as free as I've ever been, I'm so excited to see what's around the bend. And then the next thing I knew, I couldn't find anywhere nice to stay overnight. I'm sick of all this driving. Why does my stomach itch? I ought to get that checked out. I wish I wasn't so worried about money. Why is it already this cold at night? Higher highs and lower lows, in other words. It's hard to believe this story starts less than 2 years ago. It feels more like it's been 5 years because of all that's happened. It's kind of a lot, but at the same time, overall, I'm so glad to be living life to the fullest while I can. I've always loved nature. Felt like that's where I'm meant to be, that's where everyone's meant to be. Okay, not everyone feels that way for themselves, and I know that, but also, like, how could you not feel that way? But, back on subject, before this trip, I imagined that I would be sitting here afterwards, knowing the natural world like a lifelong friend you just got even closer to recently. And that's true, but that's not all. I don't like some parts of nature. And I know I might lose some cool outdoorsy person points here, but hear me out. I don't like the dust that blows into my van, making me wake up with crusty eyes in the morning. I don't like the wind that whips the flame on my stove while I'm trying to cook, squatting somewhere in the cold, so hungry. I don't like the mouse that kept me up at night with its scurrying and then left its droppings in my actual bed. I know dust and wind and mice are essential to the natural processes they belong to, but insisting I love everything and nothing ever bothers me would be false and serve no purpose. What I'm trying to say is, I've learned it's okay to admit I don't love every single bit of nature. That being said, it's all part of a bigger picture, and that is so essential to who I am personally, and what I love best about being on this planet. Still gets on my nerves, though. Because of this journey, I finally found the groove of solo travel. Stay away from places where there's groups of friends and it's just going to make you remember you're not with friends. Have a plan for everything that could go wrong and get in the habit of doing things the safest way possible. Having a kitchen, a bed, and everything you own with you is the handiest luxury. Before and during this trip, I look back at past challenges as, I had to get through that all by myself. After the trip, it kind of hit me that, while that is true also, I got through it by myself. It's hard to rely on yourself to a larger extent than when you had more of a community in your life physically, but you also realize how capable you are. When you drive through Texas and Florida and California and the entire East Coast, and any big city really, you see tons of buildings cramped together and crowded highways winding around them. Plus, add in all the places people live that I didn't see for myself. There are really so many of us. Yeah, you can just look it up online. The population of the US is 300 million, but that kind of number you can't really picture in your head. With so many human beings and social media algorithms being designed to show you what you want, so most people fall deeper and deeper into what they already believe, it makes sense why we have so many different ways of thinking. I think most people in the US hold the belief that we have a lot to work on. What we need to work on exactly is a conversation for another time and place. And really, I would think most people all over the world find some fault with the government of whatever country they live in. But sometimes when I get overwhelmed with all the work that needs to be done, I put that thought down, only for a minute, and think about what I like about the old US of A. First of all, free public restrooms and free water fountains. Couldn't live without them. But also, other countries I've been to usually have one type of natural environment. Norway has the epic fjords, Singapore has rainforests with cool plants, Italy has rolling countryside, and I love those countries for that. But I also appreciate my home country for our biodiversity. The land stretches across a continent from one ocean to another, and it happens to be not too close to the North Pole, but not too close to the equator either, so there's different climates, landforms, and weather coming in from all directions. The same country with forests and rivers is the same country with plains and swamps and deserts and fall foliage and geysers and desolately tall mountains and colorful rock formations and beaches, whether that's tropical or rocky, and whether that's rocky as in a smooth stone PNW way or a layered rough rock New England way. The richness and differences could go on forever. And just like the places are different and so incredible in their differences, so are the people. It's rare to find so many treasures in one place. Let's keep it one.